This is Fiji. An archipelago in the heart of the Pacific, where strangers are always greeted with a smile and a simple word, bula, a word that means far more than just hello. It's a wish for a healthy, peaceful life. This same land, in the eyes of the first European sailors, was once so feared that they called it the Cannibal Isles. For centuries, that name cast a shadow over Fiji, driving no shortage of ships to sail around it, rather than risk making port. And yet today, Fiji welcomes nearly 1 million visitors a year, more than its own population. People come here not just for the turquoise beaches or the famous coral reefs, but for something much harder to put into words: the peace of a society that has held on to its sense of community in a world changing far too fast. How does a nation that has stood on the edge of division more than once still hold on to a culture that values community over the individual, treats land as part of one's ancestry, and believes a bowl passed hand to hand can bind people together far more than any political speech ever could? First, we need to understand this island nation's unique place on the world map. Fiji isn't a single island. It's an archipelago of more than 330 islands, of which only about a third are inhabited. The two largest islands, Viti Levu and Vanua Levu, make up nearly all of the country's land and population. Viti Levu alone is home to about 70% of the population, and hosts both the capital, Suva, and the city of Nadi, Fiji's largest international gateway. What makes Fiji so unique isn't the number of islands, it's their location. Look at a map of the South Pacific, and Fiji sits almost exactly at the crossing point between Australia, New Zealand, and dozens of smaller island nations scattered across the vast ocean. For decades, that location has made Nadi International Airport one of the most important transit hubs in the region. For many people across the Pacific Islands, the journey out into the wider world often begins right here. That's also why Fiji is often called the heart of the Pacific, not because of its size, but because so many routes, no matter where they start, all end up meeting here. That unique location also creates something far stranger. A place where just a few steps can put you standing between two different days on the calendar. In the northeast of Fiji lies Taveuni, an island often called the Garden Island, for its lush rainforests and waterfalls that run all the way from the mountains down to the sea. What put Taveuni on the world map wasn't its scenery, though. It was a completely invisible line, the 180th meridian, once used as the basis for the international dateline. Right next to a small rugby field on the island sits a famous marker that visitors love to photograph. One foot planted in today, the other in yesterday. It sounds like time travel. In reality, all of Fiji runs on a single time zone. The dateline has been redrawn several times to accommodate national borders, so today that marker carries more symbolic meaning than it does any real division in time. Fijians themselves have never seemed too concerned with which day they're standing in. Life on the islands still runs on the rhythm of the tides, the rainy season, fishing season, and village gatherings. Far more than on invisible lines humans drew onto a map. It's a very different way of thinking about time, one shaped less by the clock and more by the rhythm of nature itself. Taveuni is also the only place on Earth where the rare red and white Tagimusia flower grows, blooming around a crater lake high in its mountains. The flower has never been successfully cultivated anywhere else, despite repeated attempts. According to local legend, its red petals rimmed in white were formed from the tears of a young woman separated from the man she loved. Today, the Tagimusia has become Fiji's national flower, a symbol that, even in this vibrant tropical land, its people, and its memories remain bound together in a way all their own. And that same bond existed long before any European ever set foot here. To understand the roots of Fiji today, we have to travel back more than 3 millennia, to the first seafarers who conquered the ocean in wooden canoes. If nature decided where Fiji sits on the map, it was people who decided what Fiji would become. This island nation's history doesn't begin with European ships. It begins with the ocean itself. About 3,500 years ago, when most of the world still regarded the sea as the edge of the unknown, the Lapita people were steering wooden canoes across thousands of kilometers of open ocean to reach the islands of Fiji. What's astonishing isn't that they got here, it's that they did it with almost no navigational technology at all, reading their course by the stars, the ocean currents, the color of the water, the flight paths of birds, and even the shape of the waves. To them, the Pacific wasn't an empty void separating islands. It was a vast network, a sea that didn't divide people, but brought them together. From Fiji, many groups continued their journey eastward, helping give rise to the Polynesian cultures that followed. In a sense, Fiji wasn't just a destination. It was the crossroads of some of the largest migrations in Pacific history. Over the centuries, the island communities grew into tribal confederations with intricate systems of chiefs, customary law, and ritual. Power wasn't measured only by the number of warriors, but by the ability to maintain relationships between villages, protect land, and organize community life. In that world, the honor of an entire clan sometimes mattered more than a single life. And it was out of the conflicts between tribes that a controversial practice emerged: cannibalism. Today, the mere mention of Fiji, alongside the phrase "Cannibal Isles," is enough to conjure images of a savage land for many people. That view reflects the perspective of 19th century Europeans far more than the full truth of Fiji. Historical research shows that cannibalism here wasn't part of everyday life. It was tied to warfare, ritual, and symbols of power between rival communities. That doesn't make the practice any less harsh. But it helps us understand that Fijian society at the time operated under a value system entirely different from that of contemporary Europe, one shaped by isolated communities competing for resources and constantly needing to defend their own territory. That reputation spread quickly along the shipping routes of Western sailors. In many maps and ship logs of the era, Fiji was marked as dangerous waters, a place many ships chose to avoid, rather than risk landing. Ironically, that fearsome image is precisely what kept Fiji largely outside many waves of colonization for a long stretch of time. But as European powers began expanding their reach across the Pacific, that isolation eventually came to an end. A decision signed in the late 19th century would change Fiji's fate forever. By the mid-19th century, Fiji was no longer a collection of isolated tribes as it once had been. Prolonged power struggles eventually pushed one figure to the center, Ratu Seru Chakobau, who declared himself king of all Fiji. In reality, uniting hundreds of islands under dozens of different chiefdoms was a task far beyond what any one person could accomplish. As conflicts continued, pressure from Western traders and powers kept mounting. Finally, on October 10, 1874, Chakobau and a number of other chiefs signed the document ceding Fiji to the British Empire, a decision often seen as the end of traditional independence, but one that also opened an entirely new chapter in this island nation's history. What's interesting is that British colonial authorities didn't take the familiar path used in many other colonies. Instead of letting Europeans freely purchase land, they chose to keep most of the land in the hands of indigenous communities. A pragmatic policy meant simply to limit conflict. But in the long run, that policy became one of the most important factors allowing indigenous Fijians to keep their connection to ancestral land right up to today. Some decisions are made just to solve an immediate problem, and yet their effects end up lasting for centuries. Another problem quickly emerged: labor. The booming sugar industry needed tens of thousands of plantation workers, while colonial authorities were reluctant to force indigenous Fijians off their village lands. The solution was eventually found more than 10,000 kilometers away: India. From 1879 to 1916, tens of thousands of indentured laborers left ports in India to cross the ocean to Fiji. Many believed the journey would only last a few years, but once their contracts ended, a great many chose to stay. They started families, grew sugarcane, opened shops, built Hindu temples, raised mosques, and raised their children right there on this new land. Over time, an entirely new community took shape: the Indo-Fijians. Unlike an ordinary wave of immigration, this community's arrival reshaped the structure of the entire nation. Fiji went from a nearly homogeneous society to a place where two major communities now lived side by side, one holding on to indigenous tradition, the other carrying language, religion, and memory from the Indian subcontinent. For decades, the two communities built the economy together. But the coexistence of these two strong identities also raised a question that would take Fiji many years to answer. Who does a nation belong to, when its own people no longer share a single answer? For nearly a century, under British colonial rule, Fiji's two major communities developed along parallel paths. Indigenous Fijians retained most of their traditional land and chiefly systems, while the Indo-Fijian community came to play an increasingly important role in agriculture, commerce, and urban life. The two communities shared one country. They just didn't always share the same view of what that country was. For many indigenous Fijians, land was never simply property. It was vanua, ancestry, lineage, the place where a person knows they belong. Meanwhile, many Indo-Fijian families had also lived on these islands for generations. They were born here, raised here, worked here. Their children had never known any homeland besides Fiji. And yet, the feeling of belonging doesn't always come simply from where you were born. Sometimes, it depends on how the wider society chooses to see you. That was the paradox Fiji faced right after gaining independence in 1970. How do you build a shared national identity when history had already produced two communities carrying very different memories? That question was never an easy one to answer, and just 17 years later, it erupted into the country's first political crisis. In 1987, a political coalition backed strongly by Indo-Fijian voters won the general election. For many, that was simply democracy at work. But for another segment of the population, it raised fears that the traditional balance of power was shifting too fast. Army officer Sitiveni Rabuka staged a coup. Just months later, a second coup followed. Fiji ended its status as a Commonwealth monarchy and officially became a republic. In the years that followed, the country kept moving forward. Tourists kept arriving, sugarcane kept getting harvested, villages kept holding kava ceremonies just as generations before them had. Daily life seemed to carry on as usual. But beneath that calm surface, questions of national identity had never truly disappeared. By 2000, crisis erupted again. An armed group led by George Speight stormed Parliament, taking Prime Minister Mahendra Chaudhry and several other lawmakers hostage for 56 days. Outside the Parliament building, violence targeting the Indo-Fijian community broke out in several areas. Once again, lines that had seemed to fade came sharply back into view. Six years later, Fiji saw yet another coup. This time, the paradox ran even deeper. Military commander Frank Bainimarama declared he was overthrowing the government, citing new policies that he said favored indigenous Fijians too heavily and were deepening ethnic division. Few coups in modern history have ever been justified in the name of building a more equal society. That doesn't make the use of military force legitimate, but it does reveal just how complex the tensions Fiji was grappling with really were. For years, the world came to know Fiji largely through these coups. But if we stop there, we miss the most important part of the story. Because what's remarkable isn't that a nation fell into crisis more than once, but how, step by step, that nation found its way out of it. Young democracies are rarely built on flawless victories. They're built on the ability to correct mistakes after the fact, and Fiji was no exception. After years of military-backed rule, Frank Bainimarama's government held a general election in 2014, the first election in nearly a decade. Not every dispute vanished overnight, but at least power once again began to be decided by the ballot. rather than the barracks. By late 2022, history came full circle in a striking way. The man who led the very first coup back in 1987, Sitiveni Rabuka, returned to power. This time, not by military vehicle, but through the results of a democratic election. That shift didn't erase the past, but it showed that Fijian society itself was changing. The challenges haven't stopped there. In 2025, Rabuka's government faced a constitutional crisis over the appointment and dismissal of the head of the country's anti-corruption body. The matter went before the courts. Both sides argued their case on legal grounds. Rulings were issued publicly. Appeals proceeded through the proper legal channels. This may not be a perfect process, but it marks a major shift. In a country that has watched military vehicles roll through its streets more than once, the most consequential disputes are now being settled in courtrooms. In late 2024, the government established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look back on these turbulent chapters of modern history. The goal wasn't to erase the past, but to understand it more fully, because it's difficult to build trust when a nation isn't yet ready to face its own wounds. What's perhaps most striking about Fiji today isn't that the country has never made mistakes. It's that Fiji is gradually learning to correct those mistakes through democratic institutions, rather than letting history repeat itself once again. If politics shows how a nation functions, there's something far deeper that shapes how Fijians see themselves: the relationship between people and land. In Fiji, land has never just been land. There's one legacy from the colonial era that still profoundly shapes how Fijians live today. Nearly 90% of Fiji's land is held under indigenous communal ownership, and by law, it can never be sold, only leased. Land is managed by individual clans, tied to the concept of vanua, a sacred bond linking land, people, chiefs, and even ancestors who have passed on. This policy has also created a downside. Many Indo-Fijian farmers, once their land leases expired after 1999, became one of the largest landless populations in Fiji. If there's one ritual that shapes the entire way Fijians interact with one another, it's the kava ceremony, also known as yakona. Made from ground pepper plant root mixed with water in a large wooden bowl called a tanoa, the drink carries an earthy, robust flavor with a slight numbing sensation on the tongue. To enter a Fijian village, you're expected to bring a bundle of kava root and present it to the chief in a ceremony called sevu sevu. Only then are you formally transformed from a stranger into a guest under the protection of the entire village. Drinking kava comes with its own set of rules. Clap once, drink the full bowl in a single gulp, then clap 3 times and say vinaka, a simple word of thanks, but one carrying deep respect. Alongside the indigenous villages and their kava ceremonies, Fiji holds within it an entirely different cultural world. that of the Indo-Fijian community. Descendants of the indentured laborers of the past still speak Fiji Hindi, an entirely new language born right on the sugarcane plantations, blending multiple Indian dialects with English and indigenous Fijian. It bears no resemblance to any form of Hindi spoken in India today. Hindu temples and mosques still stand across the country. Diwali and Holi are still celebrated with great festivity, and every year, Gurmit Day is observed to honor the grueling sea journey those ancestors once made. There's one thing that truly binds both communities together, rising above every ethnic divide: rugby sevens. With a population under 1 million, Fiji won the first Olympic medal in its history, and it was gold, at Rio in 2016, beating England itself in the final. They went on to successfully defend that gold medal at Tokyo 2020, before taking silver at Paris 2024. For Fijians, the national rugby team isn't just a sports team. It's the pride of an entire small nation, proof to the rest of the world that the size of a country has nothing to do with the size of its dreams. There's one ritual that has always made the world curious about Fiji: firewalking. On Baika Island, this tradition has existed for centuries and is preserved solely by the Sawau people. According to legend, their ancestors once freed a spirit and were granted the ability to walk across red-hot stones without being burned. Even today, chosen men still carry out this ritual. What matters most isn't actually walking across the glowing stones. It's the preparation beforehand. They must observe a long list of traditional restrictions, from diet to daily conduct, as a way of purifying both body and spirit before entering the ceremony. To an outsider, it looks like a performance. But to the Sawau, it's a reminder that true strength doesn't come from the feet. It comes from respect for tradition and a belief passed down through generations. There was a time when sugarcane fields sustained nearly the entire Fijian economy. For more than a century, sugar was this island nation's single most important export. Like so many other small economies, Fiji eventually had to change as the world around it changed. Today, the biggest source of income is no longer sugarcane fields. It's the beauty of the ocean itself. In 2025, Fiji welcomed nearly 987,000 international visitors, almost equal to the country's entire population. Tourism generated over 2.8 billion Fijian dollars, accounting for roughly a third of GDP and supporting about 120,000 jobs. But focus only on the luxury beachfront resorts, and you'll miss another lifeline, one that matters even more than tourism to a great many families: remittances. Every year, tens of thousands of Fijians travel to Australia and New Zealand under seasonal labor programs. They pick grapes, harvest apples, work on farms or in food processing plants, and send money home regularly. That money now amounts to roughly 10% of Fiji's GDP. In no shortage of villages, the fittest, most able young people are working thousands of kilometers from home, while parents or grandparents stay behind to raise the children, living off the money that arrives each month. A small economy, but one held together by flights, harvest seasons, and the quiet sacrifice of families living apart. And perhaps the most famous product Fiji has ever exported to the world isn't sugar, and it isn't its beaches. It's water. The Fiji water brand, drawn from an underground aquifer in the Yakara Valley, has become one of the most recognized premium bottled water brands in the United States. But that success also created a paradox. While millions of bottles bearing the Fiji name line shelves around the world, marketed as the picture of pure, untouched nature, many communities within Fiji itself still lack reliable access to clean water every day. A reminder that even in a tropical paradise, wealth isn't always shared evenly. If the ocean once gave Fiji life, today, that same ocean has become its greatest threat. Climate change is no longer some distant concept discussed at international conferences. In Fiji, it has become part of everyday life. In 2014, the village of Vunidogoloa on Vanua Levu became the first Fijian community forced to relocate entirely due to rising sea levels. About 150 residents moved to a new site more than a kilometer from their old village. They didn't just move houses, they had to dig up their ancestors' graves to bring them along. Because for Fijians, leaving home isn't simply a change of address. It means leaving behind a place bound up with memory, with family lineage, and with those who have passed on. Today, the Fijian government has identified more than 800 communities affected by climate change, with dozens more villages likely facing relocation in the future. In 2016, nature delivered another warning in the form of an unprecedented storm. Cyclone Winston tore through Fiji with wind speeds reaching 280 kilometers per hour, claiming 44 lives, affecting more than 62% of the population, and causing roughly $1.4 billion in damage. For many countries, that's just a headline. For Fiji, it's a shared memory carried by an entire generation. That's precisely why this small island nation has become one of the strongest voices in global climate negotiations. In 2017, Fiji became the first Pacific nation to hold the presidency of the COP23 climate conference. A small country, but one delivering an enormous message that the places contributing least to climate change are often the ones paying the highest price for it. Not every challenge Fiji faces comes from nature. There's another crisis unfolding far more quietly, one taking place right inside people's homes. In early 2025, Fiji's Ministry of Health formally declared a nationwide HIV outbreak. New infections have risen sharply, with the growing use of injectable methamphetamine standing out as one troubling driver. In just 4 years, the number of people living with HIV in Fiji rose from around 2,000 to more than 6,000. This is no longer just a health issue, it's a story about education, poverty, addiction, and the future of an entire generation. The Fijian government, alongside a number of international organizations, is now rolling out emergency response programs. Because behind the tropical beaches, tourists see, lies the very real, everyday life of nearly 1 million people, facing challenges no different from those of any other country in the world. Looking back over this entire journey, what makes Fiji special was never just its turquoise beaches or its famous coral reefs. It's the way a small nation has always managed to exist within its contradictions. A land that once terrified European sailors under the name Cannibal Isles, now known instead for the warmth of its Bula greeting. A country that lived through 4 coups in just 35 years, now steadily working to settle its disputes through law rather than force. A place where the kava bowl still passes from one generation to the next, even as coastal villages prepare for the day they'll have to leave their ancestral land behind because of rising seas. Fiji isn't a perfect paradise, and that's exactly what makes it so memorable. Because behind the sun-drenched travel photos is a society constantly working to find balance between tradition and modernity, between identity and integration, between the fragile beauty of nature and the very real challenges of the 21st century. At the heart of the Pacific, Fiji still moves like the pulse of the ocean itself, sometimes powerful, sometimes fierce, but never once standing still. Thank you for joining ExtremeX Travel on today's journey through Fiji. If one thing about this country stuck with you most, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe as we continue exploring more remarkable places around the world.